Hey everybody, welcome back to the Law Shanty. We're doing a special Law Shanty edition this week. I just did one on Tuesday, as you guys know. It's not Tuesday, it's Friday. But we thought we'd put together a quick one because we have a new gathering and face mask order from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. And we're not going to go through the whole thing, it's really long. Most of it doesn't apply to the workplace anyway, but there's this provision in it that got us thinking about the application of the MDHHS order to meetings at work, and how does that relate to what MIOSHA is doing in the emergency rule. So we decided we'd take a quick look at that and shoot one of these out for you. The MDHHS gathering order places restrictions on indoor and outdoor gatherings. So what's a gathering? Okay, according to the order, a gathering is any occurrence, either indoor or outdoor, where two or more persons from more than one household are present in a shared space. Shared space is a conference room, production floor. It's a big room or a small room. It's a room where more than one person is present at the same time. The MDHH order then goes on to say indoor gatherings are prohibited at non-residential venues, except where no more than 25 persons are gathered. That's what's in the new rule. Okay, so now we've got a 25-person limit on indoor gatherings, okay? That's a very broad definition, and it would seem to encompass in-person meetings in the workplace. For example, a production meeting or a shift startup meeting or a quarterly employee meeting, anything like that. Now, the MDHHS order does say that the above limitations, the ones I just talked about, do not apply to workplace gatherings that occur consistent with the emergency rules issued by MIOSHA on October 14, 2020. So that would seem to be an exception. If we're covered by MIOSHA, we're not covered by this rule. But wait a minute, there's two ways to look at that exception. One, it could very well mean the in-person meetings that we're talking about here. That's possible. But it could also mean that what MDHHS was saying is we're not covering, if you've got a production line, which is in a shared space, and you've got 40 people working on the production line and they're all in a shared space, that's not going to be considered a gathering for purposes of this rule, an indoor gathering. So they could be accepting the actual meetings where we all go in a conference room and have a meeting, but it could just be saying, now people who are together in a production space aren't covered. So we thought we'd go look at the MIOSHA rule and see what that says about meetings or gatherings or anything like that. And the MIOSHA emergency rule, not super helpful on this issue. It only actually mentions meetings one time. And what it says in the rule is the employer shall require face coverings in shared spaces, including during in-person meetings and in restrooms and hallways. That's the only place in the MIOSHA rule where it even says anything about meetings. Now, of course, there are other rules in the MIOSHA rule that would apply to an in-person meeting, like you have to socially distance, keep 6 feet apart to the maximum extent possible, but that's not much help. So now we've got MDHHS rule that says you can't have gatherings except within these narrow limits, and we've got but we're accepting meetings held under the MIOSHA rule, and we've got a MIOSHA rule that's not very helpful at all on what a meeting is. So, because we don't have any clarity there, and we didn't have any clarity in an FAQ or anything else written by either one of these departments, we reached out to the state to ask them. And it took a minute, but we got a response. Now, what you're about to hear is what we heard from the state. And we didn't hear this in writing. We heard this over the phone, and it's kind of inside baseball, and it is certainly not binding on the state. They could change their mind at any time. So take this with a bit of a grain of salt. But what they did tell us was actually good for you in terms of your ability to hold these meetings. What the state told us was in-person meetings held by an employer in the workplace are not subject to the gathering restrictions contained in the MDHHS rule, provided that two things are true. Number one, the meetings are for work-related purposes. Happy hour is not a work-related purpose, folks. We're still not having parties in the workplace, okay? So it's got to be for a work-related purpose. And number two, the the MyOSHA emergency rules are followed. Well, that only means we have to keep people 6 feet apart and they have to wear face masks. So that would seem to be good news. We now are not covered by MDHHS's gathering restrictions at work. We can have meetings that we need to have as long as they're for a work-related purpose, and we maintain social distancing and make people wear their masks during the meetings. And that's helpful. Now, it would be more helpful if it was in an official document written someplace on a website or something like that. And maybe it will be as a result of us reaching out and asking these questions. But at least for right now, it's not. It's just what we know. And you can use that as guidance as you plan your daily activities. With that having been said, we learned a couple other things while we were on the phone that I do want to share with you. Number one, you can count on the fact that the MyOSHA emergency rule, and that's the rule that's got the you must work from home if it's feasible for you to work from home rule in it, is going to be extended for an additional 6 months. Part of the reason for that is because under the statute under which that rule was passed, they can only extend it once and they can only extend it for up to 6 months. So that's what the state is going to do, because nobody thinks we're going to be out of this thing by April 15th when the current rule expires. So the governor's got to declare an extension being necessary. And then we're going to extend the rule for another 6 months. Now, does that mean it'll stay in place for the full 6 months? It does not mean that. The rule can be withdrawn. Does that mean that people are going to have to work from home for the next 6 months? It does not mean that either. It's probably going to say that in the rule, but the governor's got this working group now to decide how we can phase people back into office work. She's getting a lot of pressure from businesses to let people come back to work, at least partially come back to work. So let's see where we are on that. What we do know is the current rule's in place until the 15th of April. The 15th is actually the first day it's not in place, so I guess until the 14th of April. And it will likely be extended, but we'll see what that means. The other thing we're hearing is MyOSHA is considering a permanent rule around these issues, one that would have to go through the normal comment period and rulemaking process. And we will likely see something like that coming out of MyOSHA, dealing with not just COVID necessarily, but pandemic preparedness generally and that sort of stuff. Because they don't want to hassle with this emergency every time there's an emergency, or if this happens again, or if it flares back up again, or whatever. So we're likely going to see a permanent rule getting kicked off by MyOSHA. The last thing we need you to be aware of is that we are hearing that the national OSHA, as opposed to MyOSHA, is also going to issue emergency rules. We're planning on those around March 15th, and it looks like they're going to look very much like what we already have in Michigan, so that probably won't add any additional burden on you at all. Just something to keep in mind. Thanks very much. We'll see you next time.